The principal engineer of System 76 and the lead developer of System 76's Pop Bang OS Linux distribution. It's the weirdest name for a Linux distribution. It has a little exclamation point and a little underscore. It's a weird name. Has declared the Linux kernel is run by, quote, patronizing, pedantic megalomaniacs, end quote. Holy smokes. And that he doesn't, quote, even try to contribute to the Linux kernel anymore, end quote. Now, well, at first glance, these statements read like yet another round of open source drama. The open source world and drama certainly go hand in hand. There's no denying that. There's a lot more than enough drama to go around, and we definitely don't need to cover every random little he said, she said, name-calling bit of drama. But the fact that the lead maintainer of one of the most prominent Linux distributions, and by the way, I link over to my my study of Linux market share that I published about a week and a half ago. Pop! OS is banging in terms of Linux market share. Go check it out. I mean, it's really not doing too poorly for itself. But one of the absolute most lead maintainer of that distribution is refusing to have any involvement with the Linux kernel itself. That's absolutely fascinating. That is fascinating from a business standpoint, from a how do you possibly run his project standpoint. It's fascinating and peculiar. I just published this article over at the Lunduk Journal. Go to lunduk.locals.com if you want to read along with us here today. But I've got a couple of additional thoughts I want to add into this. Here's what's crazy. This all seems to stem, at least in part, from Rust, which is weird, which is really weird. Let's back up a little bit to yesterday. Yesterday, August 28th, Wedson Filho. My apologies, Wedson, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, I probably am. He's a developer that works on migrating portions of Linux kernel code, specifically around file system drivers, over to Rust. Well, Wedson sent the following email to the Linux kernel mailing list. I'm gonna read part of it to you now. This is all, I promise, this all ties together. Hey folks, this is as short a series as one can be. Just removing myself as maintainer of the Rust for Linux project. I am retiring from the project after almost 4 years. I find myself lacking the energy and enthusiasm I once had to respond to some of the non-technical nonsense. Woo. So it's best to leave it up to those who still have it in them. And then I scroll down a little bit. At the very bottom of his email, where he announces that he's not going to be part of the Rust for Linux project anymore, he says, quote, lastly, I'll leave a small 3-minute, 30-second sample for context here. And then he links to a YouTube video at a specific moment. And to reiterate, no one is trying to force anyone else to learn Rust nor prevent refactorings of C code. Thanks, Wedson. Okay, so I went and checked out that link. I went and checked out that YouTube video. And as that example of the reason he's retiring from the Rust for Linux project, Wedson included this clip of a YouTube recording from the Q&A portion of a presentation on Linux file system development that was recorded at a recent Linux Foundation event. This was actually just posted just like a month ago. I linked to it again from the article in case you want to go watch it yourself. Now, during that presentation, it was suggested that developers of Linux file system support currently written in C needed to do significant work to accommodate developers who wanted to migrate Linux file system support to the Rust programming language. Now, one of the audience members disagreed with that, saying, and I quote, "You're trying to convince everyone to switch over to the religion of Rust," which he followed up by saying, quote, "That ain't gonna happen." And then he included a large series of reasons, technical reasons, and just general practical reasons why isn't reasonable to move over. The discussion went back and forth for a few moments, and then the presentation moved on. Now, in short, just to summarize what's all there. Developers working on existing Linux kernel functionality written in C want to continue working on their code. Rust developers want those C developers to either port the existing code to Rust or spend time helping others to port it to Rust. That's the two sides of the coin, essentially. Now, this by itself is an interesting debate, as it could have rather sweeping ramifications for the Linux kernel and for related code. But that's not what we're talking about here today. This is just the pretext that leads into what, in my mind, is truly wild. This happened. System 76 and Pop! OS have entered the arena. Jeremy Soller, the principal engineer of System 76, who makes laptops and desktop PCs, focused entirely on and shipping just with Linux, including their in-house developed Pop! OS distribution, right? He chimed in with his thoughts over on X, and I'm going to read it to you now. This kind of treatment, and he's referring to the exact thing that we just talked about. This specifically, that specific email and that specific YouTube clip. This kind of treatment is exactly why I started Redux OS. Now, Redux OS, by the way, is a hobbyist system that Jeremy Soller created, written in Rust. Okay. That's why I started Redux OS from scratch and written primarily in Rust. There is a lot of resistance to even minor beneficial change in Linux and related projects. I don't even try to contribute to the Linux kernel anymore, end quote. Now, it's that last line that really caught my eye. This is the lead engineer, the lead developer of Pop! OS, the maintainer of Pop! OS, and the lead engineer working on Linux kernel support for System 76 hardware, which includes new hardware that they're developing that needs to have Linux kernel driver support, saying, quote, I don't even try to contribute to the Linux kernel anymore. What? The lead engineer at a company which ships Linux hardware refusing to work with Linux kernel. That is so strange. That is utterly peculiar. I mean, this would seem to be a massive problem. And it's certainly an inconvenience for System 76. I mean, just stand back for a second. Think about this. This would be like PepsiCo coming out and say, like the lead R&D guy for creating new beverages at PepsiCo saying, you know what? I don't even try to use carbonation anymore. We don't do carbonation here at PepsiCo, and carbonation is awful and I don't do it. I don't even try. Okay, wait, now what? I mean, it's utterly fascinating, right? This is such a core part of his business. Like, this is arguably the most core part of his business, and he's declaring that he doesn't want to have any part of it. It's just weird. I fully support people having their own opinions, right? And I fully support people expressing their opinions. But when you're one of the most public faces of your company, and you are out there saying flat out that you don't want anything to do with working with the most core part of your company, that's strange. That's a little weird. Now then he continued, though, because this gets crazy. He directly, personally attacked Linux kernel developers, seemingly most or all of them, and Linus Torvalds himself, I think, and the rest of the Linux kernel maintainers. I'm going to read it to you now. There are projects where you will inevitably have to get your changes passed. Patronizing, pedantic, megalomaniacs. Just, oh my gosh. While the Linux kernel is not only developed by this personality type, it is overwhelmingly controlled by it. Patronizing, pedantic megalomaniacs. And he's making it very clear that he's talking about both the Linux kernel developers and Linux kernel management and maintainers, which I assume would include Linus Torvalds in this because he's the top of that chain. He's not exactly mincing words here. Now, let's put aside whether the System 76 lead is right or wrong about any of that. Let's just put that aside for a minute, because yes, we've all seen stories and posts about how various people on the Linux kernel mailing list were abusive or abrasive or had conflict or drama or all sorts of extreme opinions. We've seen all of that. Let's put all that aside for a minute, whether he's right or wrong. Let's ignore that for the moment. It would seem to be a very bizarre business strategy to directly attack and insult the people building the software which your own product relies 100% upon, especially when you refuse yourself to work on that same software. Right? Again, I want to walk you through this because this deserves some bullet points. Here is what is happening here. First, System 76 ships an operating system, Pop! OS, with the Linux kernel. Okay. System 76 ships hardware with the Linux kernel, right? Everything they do has the Linux kernel in it. Everything. Everything. System 76 leadership refuses publicly to work on the Linux kernel, which, considering they're making new hardware, I don't know how that works. And then System 76 leadership goes out and publicly insults the people who do work on the Linux kernel, including the full leadership chain of Linux itself. I mean, basically, the technical lead of System 76 walked out his front door this morning, said, "What's that over there? Is that a bridge that leads to financial success for my company? Hey, I have a blowtorch here. I know what I can do to that bridge." Just like, come on, holy smokes. Now, the fifth item I want to point out because it's strange. This whole conflict appears to be originating from Rust programming language advocates who are unhappy when C programmers refuse to work on Rust or refuse to specifically support the endeavors of Rust developers, right? So they're not asking like for C developers to simply be okay with Rust developers. This is a case where when you watch the videos and read through the online statements and the blog posts and whatnot, Rust programmers are specifically asking for extra help from the C programmers. They're asking for C programmers to stop what they're doing, developing file system drivers in C and whatnot, to assist Rust developers in replacing the C code, right? Or making it easier for someone else to replace the C code. It's very, very strange. And this whole conflict seems to stem from that, which is peculiar all by itself. Now, while the open source and Linux world is certainly no stranger to drama and conflict, we've all seen a million examples of it in the last 4 weeks alone. This goes beyond mere drama and into the realm of having a significant impact on the business of System 76, both in terms of engineering and public perception. And I think we can all see the many multitude of ways in which this can impact System 76 directly. And likewise, what does this mean for the Pop! OS Linux distribution? If the lead on that project of a Linux distribution funded and run by System 76 refuses to work on Linux, on the Linux kernel, and personally insults Linux kernel leadership, what impact will that have on that particular distribution, right? I mean, they're not going to be shipping patches upstream because they refuse to work with upstream kernel. If nothing else, certainly that. And so it's very, very peculiar. And all of this appears to be rooted in an anger that some Rust developers have towards C programmers working on the Linux kernel, just simply doing the thing that they've always done. And that anger is so strong that engineering leadership at System 76 is willing to significantly harm their company over it. It's utterly bizarre. It is utterly and peculiarly bizarre. To quote a very smart man, it is a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him. I don't know what to make of any of it. Honestly, I guess I do. I guess I know what to make of it. It's just peculiar. I get to go out and mouth off. Right? My job is literally to have opinions. My job is to go out and pull together data, create interesting charts and spreadsheets based on that data, do investigative reporting, and then opine on a lot of it, right? And so if I were to come out, me, Lunduke, if I come out and say, the Linux kernel developers are a bunch of pyromaniac arsonists. Okay, they're not actually arsonists. You know what I'm saying? If I come out and I insult them, let's say I call them megalomaniacs, just like this lead dev from over at System 76 did. Okay, fine. They could disagree with me. They can agree with me. People can argue about it. People can say I'm awful for having said it, whatever. People can argue back and forth. But in the end, I only have to report to myself on this. What happened here is a business, an incredibly prominent business, a business that, by the way, used to financially support the work of the Lunduke Journal, right? Back when the Lunduke Journal, many years ago, used to take corporate sponsorships, back before we swore off all corporate sponsorships, they supported the Lunduke Journal along with many other companies, but for several years. I made System 76 an awful lot of money in those deals. And I'm a fan of much of the work that they do. But when they come out and they say, this is where it gets really confusing to me, when they make it very clear that their lead engineer won't play nice, won't work with, and in fact will abrasively and hostilely attack the people building the software that System 76 needs to just do their job, to ship their products. Oh boy, that is not a good business strategy. If you're in a position of leadership like that at a company, you can't do that, right? Or at the least, if you do that, you've got to be prepared for what the consequences are. So, I mean, really, there's two issues here. One is the practical, okay, so your lead engineer refuses to work with the software that you ship. That's a practical problem, right? That's an issue. That's a problem that internally System 76 has to overcome. But then there are the external factors. By making those statements, that has an impact on people who are thinking, hey, I want to buy a System 76 machine because it supports Linux. Oh, wait, their engineering team hates Linux. Not in a jokey way like Lunduke says. Lunduke comes out and says, oh, Linux sucks, and then jokes about how much Linux sucks, but then tells you how much he loves Linux. No. They come out and they say flat out that they dislike working with Linux so much they won't work with it. They dislike the people that build Linux so much that they won't even submit a patch to the Linux kernel. If you're looking to buy Linux hardware, doesn't that make you pause for a minute? It makes me pause for a minute. I love Linux. I do. And honestly, I generally have really fond feelings towards System 76 as well. But when I see this sort of thing, I'm like, well, okay, so what's the future of System 76 when it comes to Linux then? If I'm a user of Pop! OS, do I want to know that the person maintaining my distribution is unwilling to work with the developers and maintainers of the kernel of the operating system I'm using? That's weird. That's bizarre. No, I'm going to go find a different operating system. And then there's the public perception that they are basically at war, essentially, with the Linux kernel developers and maintainers, right? That's what it looks like to me. It looks like the head of engineering at System 76 is just blasting rockets over here at the developers of the Linux kernel that he needs to make money. Why are then the developers of the Linux kernel going to help the people at System 76? It's definitely going to fall lower on the list of priorities because, well, the people at System 76 are acting like a bunch of jerks. That's how I would feel if I was one of the Linux kernel developers or maintainers. And so I see this, and I find it dumbfounding. Now, this is not the first time that this particular individual has gone on the internet and attacked people. He's attacked me before. He's attacked 1,000 people. He attacks people regularly. So, and I don't begrudge him for having opinions. And you know what? He might even be right about some of those opinions. But this does put System 76 in an awfully tricky predicament here. It will be interesting to see how they respond. In times past, System 76 leadership has tended to say whenever their lead developer, their principal engineer, has gone out and attacked people and called people all sorts of nasty names and whatnot, and attacked tech journalists and whatnot, the other leadership within System 76 tends to say, well, we just stay out of it, and we don't tell our employees what they can or can't say or what opinions they can or can't have, and they stay out of it. And that's okay. That truly is. I don't want to begrudge anyone their freedom of speech here. I truly don't. But this particular incident reflects very strangely on the company. And so it will be very interesting to see if the company walks this one back officially. I sure know if I was running System 76, I would. Would I probably fire this particular person? Probably. I'm not saying System 76 should or even needs to. I'm just saying if I was the person's boss, this probably wouldn't fly. This is a pretty extreme thing. I mean, this is undercutting the core business of the company publicly in a napalm to the bridge sort of way. Whew, that's just a bit intense. That's a bit intense. Patronizing, pedantic megalomaniacs that they won't work with. They don't even try to contribute to the Linux kernel anymore. Crazy. Before we go today, I just want to say thank you to all of the subscribers of the Lunduke Journal. You make it so that I don't have to take any money from companies like System 76 or Red Hat or IBM or Microsoft or Amazon or anyone else. I get to be supported entirely by you, which means I get to mouth off. I can say this lead developer is a patronizing, pedantic megalomaniac. And whether I mean it or not, whether or not it's justified, I get to say it, and the only repercussion is what you think about it. And that's pretty fantastic. It doesn't matter what company I piss off. It doesn't matter what CEO gets really mad at me. I get to still say what I want to say and not have to worry about the financial rug being pulled out underneath my feet. Thanks entirely to you. So if you have not subscribed, head on over to lunduke.com or lunduke.locals.com. Grab yourself a fancy pants subscription. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.